you go to a Christmas Mass, few chords are more iconic than this one from David Willcocks' arrangement of O Come All Ye Faithful. Here's an even more iconic chord which was composed by Felix Mendelssohn as the opening of a wedding march. I want to show you some extraordinary similarities between Willcocks' word chord and Mendelssohn's wedding chord. Then, after going through their underlying principles, I'll construct my own iconic chord to reharmonize a melody in the style of David Willcocks. And when we're finished, you should have a framework for how to compose your own iconic yet original chords. I was able to get some professional singers to record tracks for this video thanks to supporters over on Patreon. Patreon also has sheet music exercises, tutorials, and ear training modules over in the shop, and your purchases there go back into channel costs. This video was also made possible with support from Roman numerals. We're going to encounter the most insane chord label I've ever made, so I'd like you to understand what it means when we get there. In order to do that, let's do a quick review of Western functional harmony. In the key of C major, we can assign numbers to each note of a C major scale, and these are called scale degrees. Usually, scale degrees are indicated with a caret over an Arabic numeral. If you build chords up from each of these scale degrees, we can define those as chords in the key and use Roman numerals. I'll also indicate chord qualities using uppercase for major chords and lowercase for minor chords. You can also have 3-note chords called triads and 4-note chords called seventh chords. But let's keep moving. The Roman numeral 1 will serve as our home base, and its function is called tonic. It feels very stable. The chords 5 and 7 usually lead to the tonic, and they're called dominant in function. 4 and 2 can very smoothly lead to the dominant, so let's call them predominant in function. I want to simplify a complex topic here, so I'm going to say that 6 and 3 are great at leading to the predominant chords and continue the pattern by calling those predominants. This is a slightly quirky approach, but it'll work well enough for the scope of this video. We could do this same procedure with a different underlying scale, like this in G major or this in D major. The entire system also exists similarly in minor keys with a few quirks about what you do with scale degree 7, but this would be A minor or E minor. Now here's the important point for this video. In this functional harmonic system, we can have a progression in the overall key and then little nested extra chords that are modules borrowed from another key. You can have a chord which has a function in the overall key, but which is also momentarily treated as tonic in relation to the chords that immediately precede it. This process of treating a chord as a local tonic is called tonicization, and the chords that lead to it are called applied chords. We can also be more specific and refer to the applied predominant or applied dominant of the tonicized chord. As an example, we can start with a functional progression in G major that goes tonic, predominant, dominant, tonic. We're in the key of G, but we could tonicize the D major chord by imagining that in the key of D major, you grab the dominant from that key. Now we've inserted an applied dominant to the D major chord. You can also tonicize a chord using both an applied predominant and dominant. Let's start with this progression. I want to tonicize that A minor chord, so I'll grab the predominant and dominant from the key of A minor and use those to lead to that chord. The important feature here is that we're using chords from outside the home key, but they functionally lock back into a chord of the overall key. Now we're ready to check out Mendelssohn's wedding chord. Felix Mendelssohn composed wedding music for A Midsummer Night's Dream in 1842, and this particular piece is still in widespread use at weddings that take place in a church. For now, I only want to play for you the first half of the phrase. It's important how this unusual chord is set up. There's a stacking up of a C major triad, and it sets up an expectation that the melody will continue the arpeggiation from C to E to G and then to C. It could have happened like this. But that's not what Mendelssohn did. He puts a weird chord at that melodic high point. This chord is extremely prominent because it is on the downbeat of the meter and held for a relatively long duration. In addition, we get that expected pitch C as the top voice, but it almost sounds like a reharmonization of our expectation. So, what is this chord? Context is important because we're in C major, but this chord isn't. You can't analyze its function until you hear its route back to the tonic. Let's start by trying to carve out a path that Mendelssohn did not use. You might notice that this chord has an F sharp in it, so one possibility is to think of it as something borrowed from G major. This chord could actually be a dominant in G major, and then that chord would take us home. That would sound something like this. It's a really efficient route back, but Mendelssohn chooses a much longer way. He composed this, which has more steps to link back home. This longer path occurs because he treats the weird chord as an applied predominant, meaning it needs to go to an applied dominant next. And then in this case, it leads to an E minor chord, which, in our home key, is a predominant chord. In total, this requires 5 steps to get that chord back home. So let's summarize these characteristics of the wedding chord. It arrives very prominently in terms of rhythm and meter. It might have even felt like a reharmonization, given that that top note continues the trajectory set up of C major. It also arrived without a clear relationship to the key until subsequent harmonies played out to reveal the trajectory. Not only was it an applied chord, its trajectory back home was relatively long because it was an applied predominant going to a predominant. And I'll also point out that it was a half diminished 7th chord, or what jazz musicians call a minor 7 flat 5. Now that you understand how the wedding chord works, let's look at the iconic chord that signifies the start of a Christmas Mass in David Willcocks' arrangement of O Come All Ye Faithful. His arrangement had to go with an existing melody, and for the final verse, Willcocks created a reharmonization. The word word occupies an especially prominent location. It is a climactic high point, starting the phrase held for a long time and on the text word of the Father. That's a great spot to give it a poignant and powerful chord. David Willcocks doesn't disappoint. Like Mendelssohn's iconic wedding chord, this is another big half-diminished 7th chord, held on the downbeat for long duration, reharmonization of a melodic high point, and the harmony is hard to place how it relates to the home key, because it doesn't fit into our key here, which is G major. Let's ignore Willcocks' next chords for a moment and explore how you might try to get this chord back home with a functional progression. This chord has no sharps or flats, so it could have locked back into C major like this. However, that's not what David Willcocks did with this chord. Like Mendelssohn, he takes a very long route to get it back home. First, it is an applied predominant harmony, which leads to this A minor chord. That chord is in turn an applied predominant harmony leading to an E minor chord. And that is in turn yet another applied predominant going to the dominant here, D major, which finally brings us home because that chord is 5 in the key of G major. This yields probably the all time most bonkers Roman numeral analysis of a chord I've ever encountered. It's 2 half diminished 7 of 4 of 2 of 5. There are other possible analyses, especially of that E minor chord, because it actually does fit into the home key. But I don't want to get sidetracked. Feel free to fight about it in the comments. Now listen to how this chord feels outside the key and then takes a very long functional route back home. Both the wedding and word chords took a half diminished sonority not in the home key. They made it really big, very long route back to the tonic. We might also consider them both as reharmonizations of a melodic high point. Now let's make that into a set of guidelines that we can use to invent new iconic chords. First, try to pick an important spot for your iconic chord. By this I mean if you have a melody to reharmonize, look for a climactic moment such as a high note, a long note, or one on a downbeat. Second, use a chord that lies outside the key. Could be a half diminished sonority, like these two were, but it doesn't have to be. If you don't want to use a half diminished sonority, I recommend something spicy with 4 or 5 different notes in it. Third, once you have your unusual chord, try to make the route back very long by at a minimum making it an applied predominant to a predominant. If applicable, my fourth recommendation would be to take into consideration text meaning if there is any. Willcocks clearly wanted to make the Word of God feel special. I decided to do this exercise for the third verse of the hymn, It Came Upon a Midnight Clear, because it has a really evocative text that I wanted to reflect musically. It mentions woes of sin and strife, 2,000 years of wrong and warring humankind, which is perfect. And then there's also hush the noise, hear the angels sing. And the syllable war is a perfect spot for one of these iconic chords because it's a melodic high point, long note, downbeat, and poignant text. As a frame of reference, here's the standard harmonization unadorned first. For my reharmonization on that dramatic war chord, I couldn't resist putting the opening motive into the organ pedals and Men's part at that spot, since I wanted to add a little chaos to that feeling of war. I also went all out on text painting at other moments, the woes of sin and strife, the years of wrong, hushing the noise. It was all just too evocative to leave unadorned.